Want to welcome everyone to the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee's meeting today. Just want to first starting how we always start by acknowledging our committee members. I first want to lift up our veteran of the committee, Senator George Edwards. I also see Senator Johnny Ray Sailing, and I know that we'll be joined by Senator Mike Jackson momentarily. Today we will hear three briefings. We'll hear from the Office of the Attorney General. We'll hear from the Department of Planning, and we'll also hear from the Maryland Environmental Services. I also want to acknowledge at this moment and bring up Caleb Weiss to make sure that you do the budget analysis for the Office of Attorney General. Caleb, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here to start the presentation. Can everyone see the screen? For the Office of the Attorney General, the fiscal 2023 budget allowance increases by 2.6 million or 5.5%, which brings the total to 49.9 million. Before we get into the fiscal 2023 budget, there's a few proposed deficiencies for the fiscal 2022 budget. The first is a deficiency related to the unemployment insurance lawsuit. This deficiency includes $545,000 in special funds supported by the Consumer Protection Division recoveries. And this goes for legal costs related to defending the Maryland Department of Labor in the unemployment insurance lawsuit. The next deficiency is related to the Independent Investigations Division. This division is charged with investigating all alleged or potential police-involved deaths of civilians and providing a report containing these investigative findings to the state's attorneys of the counties that have jurisdiction in a given incident. The new division began its work in October of 2021. This fiscal 2022 deficiency funding proposes adding $877,000 in general funds to support the Independent Investigation Division's operating cost, and is in addition to reallocating 9 positions and $924,000 in associated general funds from the Legal Counsel and Advice Division to this newly created division, meaning the Independent Investigations Division. These 9 positions include 4 administrator positions, 1 position of program manager, 2 assistant attorney generals, 1 division director, and 1 principal counsel position. The fiscal note for the creation of the Independent Investigations Division estimated that the division would require 22 additional staff and cost an estimated $2.4 million in fiscal 2022, increasing to $3 million in fiscal 2026. The fiscal 2023 allowance provides this division with approximately $1.9 million in general funds. DLS asked that OAG should comment on the personnel levels for the Independent Investigations Division and if any additional staff will be needed to fulfill the division's objectives. DLS also recommends the adoption of committee narrative, requesting a report detailing the work of the Independent Investigations Division over the course of its first year of operations. Related to that is Exhibit 1. This shows the work of the Independent Investigation Division's caseload during the first 3 months of operations. That includes the new investigations in a given month, the existing investigations, that is investigations that were rolled over from prior months that are still being completed, and the potential investigations. That's the number of incidents involving police that might need to be investigated by this division. Moving on to the overview of agency spending for the fiscal 2023 allowance. As you can see here, this shows it broken out by the divisions within the Office of the Attorney General. As you can see, the 2 largest are the Legal Counsel and Advice Division and the Consumer Protection Division here. One issue that arose in the fiscal 2023 budget relates to the Senior and Vulnerable Adult Asset Recovery Unit. This unit was established by the General Assembly with the passage of Senate Bill 407 of 2020. This bill was vetoed by the governor. However, the veto was subsequently overridden, and in Chapter 3 of 2021, this unit was established under statute. The governor is required by this statute to include $250,000 in annual appropriations for the creation of this division beginning in fiscal 2023. However, it was unclear if any of this was included in the fiscal 2023 allowance. OAG should comment on the status of the Senior and Vulnerable Adult Asset Recovery Unit and if any of the functions of the new unit were currently being fulfilled by existing divisions. Moving ahead to Exhibit 3, which is the proposed budget changes. As you can see here, this is for the personnel, the largest of which is an increase due to turnover expectancy. And on the next page, you can see the increases due to non-personnel costs. In terms of personnel, the fiscal 2023 allowance includes one additional new regular position. On the next page, you can see the personnel changes include a net increase of one new Assistant Attorney General position and legal counsel and advice. This position is necessary to aid in the implementation of Chapter 76 of 2021, which provides compensation and benefits to individuals who have been wrongfully convicted and incarcerated for crimes they did not commit. Below that, with Exhibit 4, which deals with the vacancy rate within the Office of the Attorney General. As you can see here, the vacancy rate has risen to 15.9% from 10.6% the prior year. And OAG now has 45.4 positions vacant, as you can see in the exhibit. The current attorney vacancies include 2 principal counsel positions, 11 Assistant Attorney General positions, and 1 staff attorney position. OAG has also reported difficulty recruiting auditors and paralegals. As you can see here, the 2 largest areas of vacancies are the Consumer Protection Division and the Legal Counsel and Advice Division. That kind of mirrors the breakdown in spending, as these are the 2 largest areas of spending as well. Given that DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on vacancy rates within OAG, barriers to attracting qualified applicants, and the caseload data for each of OAG's divisions or units. Moving ahead to the Managing for Results section, this deals with the Consumer Protection Division. In fiscal 2023, the amount of funds recovered for consumers has increased by 11% compared to prior years. During the same period, the amount of funds recovered for consumer protection purposes remained consistent at $10.6 million. The next section regards the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit in Exhibit 6. The number of investigations completed has decreased by 25.6 between fiscal 2020 and 2021. The amount of dollars recovered by this unit has dropped dramatically by 41.5% in fiscal 2021. However, it is important to note that this large spike here in the amount of funds recovered was due to a large opioid settlement, and the unit has been able to continue to operate during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. In Exhibit 7, deals with the Antitrust Division and enforcement actions taken. The number of investigations and inquiries decreased by 8.7 million in fiscal 2021. However, the number of enforcement actions increased by 8.6% during the same period. Issue number 2 is the establishment of the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force. Chapter 746 of 2021 established a right to counsel in cases of eviction for qualifying individuals. It also established the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, which consists of 15 members appointed by the Attorney General. This task force was responsible for studying potential funding sources and making recommendations for implementing this program. The task force is also required to submit a report annually to the governor and the General Assembly on January 1st of each year. The first report was received last month. I won't go through each of the, the recommendations of the first task force, but they are included here in the budget analysis. Sorry for the scrolling, on page 12. DLS asked that OAG should comment on the work of the task force and update the committees on the implementation of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program, including the office's future role in addressing this issue. I will note that additional discussion of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, the agency responsible for administering this program, and additional information on the Access to Counsel and Evictions program can be found in the Judiciary Operating Analysis, and will also be found in that presentation as well. For the recommended budget actions, these are the two reports that DLS recommended adopting committee narrative to request. The first regards to the Independent Investigations Division. It also requests that MFR data, managing for results data, be submitted with regarding this division with the next budget submission, and the vacancy report. And with that, that ends my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Caleb. And seeing no questions from members of the committee, I'd like to bring up our Honorable, the Attorney General Brian Frosh and his team. Attorney General Brian Frosh. Sorry, sir, you're muted. Not yet. There you go.
I do my best work when I'm muted. I got to tell you that. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. And I want to thank our budget analyst, Caleb Weiss, for the work he's done in analyzing our budget. And I want to reintroduce you to the two folks who are with me this afternoon. They're the folks who really know something. Bev Pivick is our Director of Administration, and Carolyn Quattrocki, I know a number of you know, she's my deputy. Because we're here to talk about money, I thought I would highlight just a few of the cases that we've handled in the past year that have or will bring in substantial amounts of money to the state. First, we entered into an $18 million settlement with the Royal Bank of Scotland to resolve the financial crisis era claims that that RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, misled investors in the issuance of residential mortgage-backed securities. It followed our $20 million settlement with Deutsche Bank, Wells Fargo. Our Deutsche Bank settlement was $95 million, and our Wells Fargo settlement was $20 million. We also won our tobacco arbitration, which will bring an additional 16 to 18 million bucks to the state. We settled a case against McKinsey & Company for their role in advising Purdue Pharmaceuticals on opioid marketing, and we recovered 12 million bucks from that one, all of which will be used for abatement related to the opioid epidemic. And we are in the midst of completing a settlement with the three major opioid distributors, McKesson, Amerisource, Bergen, and Cardinal Health. And that settlement should pay Maryland and its subdivisions approximately $318 million. We also are completing a settlement with Johnson & Johnson along the same lines, and it will provide $75 million to our subdivisions and to the state. And I should say we're in the midst of a negotiation with Purdue and the Sackler family. We're one of 9 states that objected to the bankruptcy plan. We're trying to get more money from the Sackler family. And I think we're making some headway, but the results won't be known for a couple more weeks. At any rate, those are just the cases in which we've received settlements of more than $10 million over the past year. There are many, many others where we've gotten smaller amounts, but as I like to tell the Department of Budget Management, we're a profit center. The more resources we have, the more money we'll get for you. Let me address the specific issues mentioned by Mr. Weiss. The first has to do with the unemployment insurance lawsuit. We would urge you to reject the recommendation that our office pay the costs of the outside counsel that was needed to defend the governor's decision to cut off unemployment insurance benefits. It would be an unprecedented move to punish the office of the Attorney General when we determine that outside counsel is necessary to meet a client's needs. And requiring us to pay this is, we think, unjustified, and it exacerbates what is already chronic underfunding of our office, and we'll come back to that in a minute. With respect to the Independent Investigations Division, after 4 months of operation, it's become clear that we have a crucial need for additional staff, particularly additional investigators. I believe the governor put 27 positions in the budget. 18 of those went to the state police, and they have difficulty bringing those folks online because you got to do 18 months worth of training and testing and all that kind of stuff before you can get a new state police officer. They are pulling people off of other assignments to man this unit, but we only have 9 folks, and you all created this independent unit because you believe that independent investigations can be more assured of accurate outcomes and, perhaps equally important, earn greater confidence from the public. Based on the current workload, and we have 10 pending investigations, we anticipate that moving forward, we will need 3 additional investigators, 2 additional attorneys, and 1 administrative support position. The numbers that we've seen so far, and we've had like 30 referrals, but we only have 10 pending investigations. That's sort of on track for what you would expect for 1 year. We estimated originally 30 to 40 police-involved fatalities that would require investigation. But the simple fact is that the greatest number of these incidents and the most crime occurs during the summer months. And so it's a little alarming for us to see that we're already on track to hit, the 30 to 40 number when we haven't even gotten to the warm weather that usually sees the biggest spikes in our caseload. Let me talk about the access to counsel funding. Under the statute, the Maryland Legal Services Corporation is the entity that's responsible for implementing the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Our understanding is that in the absence of funding for that program, there has been only modest progress towards its implementation. Yeah, MLSC did identify some existing funds that can be used for initial implementation of the program, and consistent with the recommendations from the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, they have issued a request for proposal for program evaluation and publicized a job listing for a program coordinator. With DHCD's recent announcement of funding from the ERAP II money coming from the federal government. They've said they're going to allocate some to legal services, and we anticipate and we hope that the implementation efforts will accelerate as that happens. Once program implementation efforts begin in earnest, the task force will need to develop more concrete plans for undertaking its oversight and evaluation functions. Under the law, our office's primary function is to appoint members to and provide staffing for the task force. With the support of that staff, the task force is operating largely independent from our office. And we continue to provide staff support as required by law and to appoint new members as appropriate. Like the task force, our office supports an annual allocation in the budget for the program, and we will continue to advocate for that and any other appropriate sources of funding. With respect to the vacancy report, we hope you won't make us go through that. The challenges that we face have been well documented previously and made much worse by the pandemic. We don't, we're understaffed. We don't have folks to divert to write this report. The bottom line and the biggest problem that we have is that our salaries are just not competitive. We certainly don't compete with folks going into private practice, with the law firms. We don't compete with the federal government. They pay 50% more than we do. We lose people every day to the feds. Unfortunately, we're also now starting to lose them to the counties and to the city. Our salaries just don't match up. In fact, one of our attorneys, who I thought was a really high achiever and loved being in our office, left to work for a nonprofit. He was someone who works in consumer protection, left to work for a nonprofit working in the same area. He was making $75,000 a year more than he was making working for us. This is nonprofit. So, our employees do a diverse range of sophisticated legal work, and they range from areas like public finance to real estate to information technology to public-private partnerships and complex environmental work. And, they're litigating cases that are worth tens of millions of dollars. And of course, many of them are working to protect the lives of vulnerable citizens. But they can walk across the street and make 50% more, 200% more, 300% more, depending on where they go. Our enforcement divisions like consumer, securities, antitrust bring in large recoveries. And we are in all of these areas competing against the private sector and other governments to recruit and retain not just attorneys, but also auditors and legal assistants and investigators. And there is a pronounced gap between our salaries and the attorney salaries in all those other venues. We did a salary study that we submitted to the Department of Budget Management. I think it was in 2019, it may have been 2020, which we will provide for you. And it's dated by a couple of years, but the conclusions are not only the same, but the gap is worse than it was a couple of years ago. So even when there are qualified attorneys with a desire to engage in public service who want to work for us, they often can't afford to do so. We lose them when their kids are ready for college, and we lose them when they just get much better opportunities across the street, across the city, or across the state. Finally, I just want to make one more point. In Senate Bill 504 last year, required our office to appoint a special education ombudsman. And the ombudsman is directed to set up a toll-free number, operate a call center for parents, for teachers, other interested parties who need guidance on the services that are provided for folks with special needs children in public schools. We've repeatedly asked for a PIN and funding for this requirement, but have not received one. And we have literally zero existing resources. As you can see, we have a large number of vacancies because, like everybody else, we're facing the Great Resignation, and we just don't have the resources or the PINs to meet this requirement. So we hope you can help us there as well. And thank you for indulging me. I hope I haven't talked too long, Mr. Chairman, but I would be delighted to answer any questions.
No problem, Mr. Attorney General. We're glad to hear. Well, I'll see if my committee has any questions. I did have one question. In reference to the new unit that's being created, I know that we can't always affect the things that were before us, but we can in reference to the things that are in front of us now. So if you can speak to the diversity of the 9, like from a geographic, women, race, that would be helpful.
The diversity of the 9
new employees.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the head of the unit is Dana Mulhauser. She's a woman, great background, worked at the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, came from the county of St. Louis, heading up a unit much like ours. She's a rock star, top of her class at Harvard Law School. She's just fantastic. Her assistant's name, all of a sudden, I'm blanking on. The deputy is an African-American woman who we recruited from the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office.
Renee Joy.
Renee Joy. I kept thinking Joy Reid, you know, I knew it wasn't Joy Reid. We have the head of our chief investigator is a white male. His deputy is Latino. Carolyn, can you tell me?
I can't remember their names, but I think there are 2 other investigators. One is an African-American female and one is a white male, I believe.
No, just wanted to say thank you for that being that intentional. I think that that's very important, that our diversity is reflected across the state of Maryland is what our workforce look like. So I knew that this was something new. I know that I brought this to the attention of the Senate President, whether we were trying to figure out whether it would be with the Office of State Prosecutors or the Attorney General's office. Obviously, it landed at the Attorney General's office, but this was one of the very important points. So I thank you for the intentionality. That's very important. I'm gonna see if there are any other questions by my committee mates. Okay, so I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it on behalf of the group. You know, as this may be the last time that we see you in front of our respective budget committee, Attorney General Frost, we just wanted to say thank you for your leadership, not only in our body, but also the leadership that you have spent the last several years in the Office of Attorney General. You've led with such a great example for all of us, for all across the state of Maryland, and it goes unsaid, but just wanted to lift that up, Mr. Attorney General, because it's very important from that standpoint. Just say that as my body in reference to the entire subcommittee.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I didn't think you were that easy to fool, but I really appreciate it. I appreciate the kind words. I also have enjoyed working with every single member of this subcommittee. You know, Senator Edwards and I have served together in public service in some form or other for 36 years. I think he's been at it longer than I have, but we don't, you know, we don't always agree, but we always enjoy each other's company and respect each other's views. And I don't know Senator Salling as well, but have enjoyed my contacts with him. And Sheriff Senator Jackson and I have been friends for a long time. And of course, Mr. Chairman, I have great admiration and respect for you, and appreciate, with respect to all four of you, great work and important work that you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And Caleb, just also wanted to say thank you for the thorough and very detailed analysis that you gave on the Office of Attorney General. Colleagues, at this moment, we'll move away from the Attorney General's office and we'll move over to Department of Planning. And I would like to ask if Andrew Gray, Mr. Gray, if you can read out the analysis for the Department of Planning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 1 of the analysis is the operating budget summary. You see there the Maryland Department of Planning, or MDP, increases by $1.2 million between fiscal 22 and 23 to $24.3 million in its budget. In terms of the fiscal 22 actions, there is a $49,918 federal fund deficiency appropriation. This is for the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum. It's for technical assistance or for contractual full-time equivalent to work on the Patterson collection. That's federal funding through the American Rescue Plan Act. And moving now to the overview of agency spending. See, the largest component of the agency spending is the Management Planning Educational Outreach Program, and that's primarily due to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority grants being budgeted there. And then there are lesser amounts for the Operations Division, Museum Services and Planning Coordination, and the other components as noted. In terms of the proposed budget, once again, it's around the increase around $1.2 million. The personnel changes, not too much going on there in terms of personnel. There are some larger changes going on in the other changes category. I'd like to highlight just a couple of here. Maryland Humanities Council funding increase. We'll talk a little bit more about that and a little clarification on the wording in the analysis. Maryland Semi-Quincentennial or 250 Commission, co-staffed by the Maryland Department of Planning, is an increase of $250,000. And then just two other components really briefly here. Patterson Center and in the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory are both getting capital projects. They're moving their collections out, $326,000 increase for that purpose. And then finally, there's also a Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory walk-in freezer and cooler units for $200,000 increase. In terms of the Maryland Humanities Council funding, the entire situation is that there is $500,000 for a new grant that's going to the Maryland Humanities Council to basically kind of provide for opportunities for various organizations in Maryland that have been experiencing challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's known as the SHINE Grant, and it kind of builds on funding that was provided through the Federal CARES Act and the American Recovery Act as well, that provided for similar funding. So I imagine what they're likely to do is use a similar pattern in terms of the grant making that they're going to be providing to communities. Then in terms of the Maryland Humanities Council kind of base grant, there's the $107,000 in general funds. And instead of $150,000 in general funds as was provided last year, it's $150,000 in lottery funding instead of it be provided for this purpose. And is it kind of make the chart work? The Maryland Humanities or Maryland Heritage Areas Authority grants actually do go right down by $150,000 in special funds between the 2 years. In terms of the Maryland Semi-Quincentennial Commission, it's an increase of $250,000 for this purpose. Governor signed executive order back in January 2021, creating the commission, but did not provide any funding at that point. They've had 2 meetings in the fall of 2021, and now they've come in with a budget request for $250,000. And funding would be allocated as noted here. And this is really for kind of exploring what the American Revolutionary War period means in terms of Maryland, in terms of communities that haven't necessarily had their stories told, and in terms of really kind of building some excitement for the fact that the country is 250 years old. So the information is including marketing materials for the larger components of the funding, $135,000 for that purpose. There's a curriculum report in terms of educational curriculum on the American Revolutionary War period. There's commission travel also to various meetings and conference attendance. There's some print and other collateral as well. And then there's also a fairly substantial amount, $50,000 for scholars, colloquium, and other symposium. The idea there, kind of look at kind of broadening that conversation about what the American Revolutionary War period really means. Then finally, translation services in order to make sure there's equitable information getting out to all communities in Maryland. Department of Legislative Services recommends the committee narrative be added, requiring submission of a report by December 31, 2022, and how the fiscal 23 funding is being used by the commission, just to kind of get an update on how things look at that point. In terms of the personnel data, there's no change in the regular positions. MDP has filled a lot of its long-term vacancies, an impressive amount of change between the 2 years. And that's really impressive work on their part, reflects virtual interviews and just general recruitment activity that they've been conducting. In terms of the first issue here, this concerns the census. And so census has been completed. There's still wrap-up work and kind of more detailed analysis of the data that's come in so far. Exhibit 3 reflects the census response rates for the various levels going from counties to municipalities to census tracts in the kind of most detailed area. And you'll see on the far right that there's actually a decreasing percentage responses, self-responses rates for each of those levels as you go further down. And I imagine this is largely because there are more census tracts, or like some of the counties have maybe not as many census tracts, but then are having a fairly high response rate, but then other counties with a lot of census tracts might have lower response rates in that area. The Department of Legislative Services that MDP comment on the next step in this process, which is whether it's participating in the 2020 Census Count question resolution operation or post-census group quarters review, and to discuss any preliminary data that might be available on those topics. Second issue concerns the U.S. population growth and shrinking of Maryland's population. So what's happening here is the data, the vintage 2021 data from the Census Bureau indicates between July 1, 2021 and July 1, 2020, 1 year period, that the US as a whole actually saw the slowest growth since its founding, which is an interesting statistic. And in fact, over the same time period, Maryland lost population. Exhibit 4 on the next page reflects the kind of the big picture look for all the different states, Texas, Florida, Arizona, all getting more population as a result of various inputs and outputs in terms of domestic, international migration, deaths, and births. But then you see some large decreases on the far end of the scale here for New York, California, Illinois, Massachusetts, and then Maryland is right here, losing a little bit of population. So interesting changes going on there. It looks like the birth rates are not matching the death rates, and there's also just not as much international migration coming to the US as a whole. And also you're seeing more domestic migration from the Northeast to the Southwest. Department of Legislative Services recommends the MDP comment on the long-term impacts of the decline in Maryland's population on school enrollment, jobs, and state revenues, and any impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on birth rates in Maryland. And moving on to issue 3, the concerns of Maryland Heritage Areas Authority grants. And you see here that the total cash and in-kind match leveraged is greater than the amount funded, so they're meeting more than the 1-to-1 match requirement. Some of the racial equity concerns that have been brought up in the past, the agency is addressing them, is working towards actually has put together a group to explore these issues, and hopes to have by summer or fall 22 a report and presentation on those topics in terms of the availability of funding of Maryland Heritage Areas Authority grant funding for communities that have not necessarily experienced those benefits before. And finally, in terms of this particular topic, there was an economic contribution study that was conducted last year. That information was hopefully going to be updated annually. The idea is to kind of make it a sustainable process and not just have a consultant do a one-time basic report, but be able to kind of update that data every year. The COVID-19 pandemic has really put that on hold, at least fiscal 24, maybe even fiscal 25, due to the financial difficulties that many organizations that receive this type of funding have been experiencing as a result of the pandemic. The one recommended action here is to have that Maryland Semi-Quincentennial Commission funding report submitted by the end of this year. There is one update in the analysis that concerns the Historic Revitalization Tax Credit Program staffing report. Concern here is the tax credit was the small commercial tax credit and the residential, and also the commercial, large commercial, There are difficulties in terms of the turnaround period for those particular programs. Funding was restricted to provide for until a pending report submission on staffing and also converting a contractual FTE to a regular position. And after a little bit of toing and froing in terms of kind of the periods in which that could occur, MDP has converted that regular position, that contractual to a regular position, has seen improvements in its turnaround period for permits in general. And my understanding is that they're now at full staffing capacity right now. And they're also additionally working on some additional application portal improvements as well. And so there are also transparency provisions as well. So a lot of good work going on there. And we usually don't talk about audits. In this particular case, I wanted to highlight that the audit was completed with no findings disclosed. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Seeing no questions from colleagues, I'd like to at this time bring up the Department of Planning, the Honorable Secretary Robert McCord and his team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'd like to start by thanking Andrew Gray for his close attention to detail. He's been interested and he's shown an interest in our department in every little nook and cranny, and we appreciate that. And also the call out about the audit. No audit findings is a credit to all the people that work here, not just the people in the finance, but the people that do their jobs correctly to make the finance work, and then the finance people to make sure it's all captured correctly. So I have a lot to be proud of because there's no findings in the audit. So I just wanted to tell Andrew Gray, I appreciate that, bringing that to light for you. He's asked us to comment on a couple of things here. The census count question resolution operation. Planning has already presented to the planning directors roundtable on this, the state data center affiliates meetings, the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, the WashCog group for cooperating the Maryland jurisdictions there about this program and what it can do. Now, I wanted to make it clear to everybody that it sounds like this is trying to find the missing people. The missing people can be found only because we're trying to find the missing addresses. It's primarily an address program. So if you have, for instance, my example has been like if you have 1029 Oak Avenue and you have counted everybody on Oak Avenue, but 1029 Oak Avenue now was continued in the past 10 years across its cross street and continues down the street. And now you have more houses on that street. We have to make sure that the 38 people living in the additional houses built on Oak Avenue are counted. So we do a good job in Maryland, so good, in fact, that the U.S. Census Bureau wants to use our processes as a model for trying to do the local update of census addresses. So that's the basis of the census process. Do we have where everyone lives? So we have the places where they live. So that process, we are in communication with the Census Bureau about how we can make that our processes in Maryland a model for the nation. So remember, this is primarily about addresses. That process last year for the complete the census count question resolution process, the last time in 2010, we had about Baltimore City and 14 other jurisdictions had filed their papers regarding a question on the counts. And there were 2,124 people additionally identified, and that was to the positive, and also 1,792 people that should not have been counted or were double counted. It netted only 332 people. So this is a process that focuses on the addresses, not necessarily the people. You catch the people if there's a problem. We will be looking over everything to make sure that every address was counted, and we will make sure that we do everything we can. If people have a problem with the number of people that were counted, we will go back to the Census Bureau and raise that issue. So we are committed to doing that. And we've, as we say in the written response, we've had all this assistance given to local jurisdictions, how to submit the challenge, supporting data that's required for that. And we've reached out to everybody who's on our planning services data list to figure out if your jurisdiction is interested in doing this, we are interested in helping with it. We will definitely participate in the post-census group quarters review. to make sure that the location of the group quarters are done correctly. Because we have an issue with the correctional institution in the Jessup area, because there's a couple of different buildings. They may end up in different census tracts. So we make sure that everybody is counted correctly. And we reached out to all the students in dormitory situation about the issues with those counts in Maryland. Every college in Maryland received a letter from me during the census to make sure they get their information into the U.S. Census Bureau about what happens in the census, both for the people that are living on the campus and the people who are living off campus. So that information, a personal request from me to be delivered to the Census Bureau to make sure we have the best count we have possible. So that's part of the process that we went through to make sure that process was as fruitful for us as possible. And then there's a question about the long-term impacts of decline in Maryland's population on school enrollment and jobs and state revenues and such. And I want to caution, as we said in the written response, it's premature to make long-term conclusions about impacts of COVID on the school enrollment, especially the school enrollment, because the school enrollment, based on most of the demographers who have published papers on the issue, they're talking about kind of a baby bust, not a baby boom. It's not like a big snowstorm, everybody kind of stays home. It's just the opposite. It's people are not willing to have either the first child or maybe a subsequent child until they understand the economic framework. So that's leading to a slight decrease in population that may be offset by increase in population once things get, however we can call this, more closer to normal. So there will be we expect there will be a bounce back in some of these indicators. The school enrollment projections take into account that 2021 and 22 school year enrollments, and we use those enrollments in our projections, and that leads to lower projected enrollments. Our population projections, we use the 2020 census numbers as the base, and this shows a slight increase in long-term projections. But remember, the census numbers were projected higher, so that the higher projections, when you have lower numbers coming in, then we have to make sure that all the projections are adjusted. And that's critical now in this phase right after the census, to make sure we have the best count possible, to make sure that we agree with the census projections that they will make for the next 10 years. So we're keeping a careful eye on that, and we're in constant communication with the Census Bureau about what your estimates are going to be for us. And it's all detailed in the written analysis there. And then I just added the comment about to the extent that a good economy has a positive impact on population growth. The other indicators published by the Census Bureau show that our economy is in good shape. Maryland is 4th in the nation of business applications. That's better than our neighboring states. It is more telling that business applications with wages, which is a separate category for the census, we're 2nd in the nation there. And then finally, Maryland's 1st in the nation in general sales tax collections in that October 20th, October 2020, October 2021 time period. So the sales tax collections, number one, up 46.40%. So we have some good economic indicators, which are indicators of things getting way better, and then the population rebounding potentially quicker than other places. So I'm not so concerned about making a positive, getting everybody upset about a dip in the population as reported at the moment, because I think things will even out. And as long as we're doing well, we have the chance for the population to regain quicker than other people that have lost population. But as you saw in those charts that Andrew showed you, that all the populations are generally going down, and we have to keep an eye on that, and we are. So if you have any other questions, Mr. Chair, or your committee, I'm happy to entertain that. Well, the last thing, I'm sorry, that the Maryland 250, we will, that's the other thing Andrew brought up. And it's only $1 for every year we've been around for 250,000 of them, but it's not really, it's $1,000 for each of those, but it is comparable to what is happening in the neighboring states. Just, I wanted to bring to your attention that actually you have Pennsylvania with a request for funding in 2019 was $200,000. Now they're requesting $500,000 a year. New Jersey, $500,000 appropriation for their commission. They've already spent $300,000 in assessing their tourist sites. Massachusetts, their funding request is $1.25 million over the next 2 years. Virginia provided $245,000 for seed money and a $15 million budget request over 4 years. And then South Carolina has a $245,000 allocation and a $9.9 million request for next year. So we are competing with the other colonial states to make sure that we can address the issues. This is way more than painting a few fire hydrants and going home like happened during the bicentennial. This is going to be not just a commemoration of 1776. It's going to be more like a birthday where you celebrate 250 years and celebrate the growth over 250 years, how we've grown, changed, and hopefully how we've matured as a country. So telling every one of those stories from every one of those perspectives, we are intentional about that. And we want to make sure that as a commission, Maryland's story is told as this whole concept of freedom unfolds, and it continues to unfold. So that's the reason for that's the reason for the request. I wanted to put it in the context of the other jurisdictions that surround us, and I want to let you know that we have no problem giving you a report as requested. So that's fine. So with that, I'll take your questions. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
Sure, Secretary McCord. I'm messing with you.
I am done this time.
First, I just wanted to say once again to just lifting up the audit piece, but I also think that there's another piece to be commended for your agency. Last year, when we talked about it, there were a number of pins that were over a year. And I know that Andrew Gray had highlighted that, but you all have done yeoman's work, making sure, especially during a challenging time for employment. So I say thank you for that and moving the agency forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Secretary McCord, I just got one question, and I'll open it for my colleagues if they have any questions. So you all sent the report in for the tax credit reviewer. On page 18 of Mr. Gray's report, he talked about it did get down to 30 days in reference to the review for the historical tax credits and things of that nature. But then it talked about how it moved back up to 45 days. Now, I do think that that 30 to 45 day moment may be within some form of normalcy, but I just wanted to make sure we weren't in the direction of peaking past the 45 days, because that was what sparked the report in the beginning. And also, I think I should lift up Director Hughes, because I know that she worked adamantly on this, and we talked profusely about this, and just thank you for moving it in the right direction.
Yeah, I can address that. So the 45 to 60 day review is for the competitive commercial and small commercial tax credits. And they're going to be more complicated projects than the residential owner occupied projects, which tend to be smaller in nature. It might just be a roof replacement or, siding and roof or something like that. And so we had some new staff as a result of, this process of filling all the vacancies and getting them trained up. And so now, although we no longer have any funding for the small commercial component of the program right now, that number had decreased. We were turning those small commercial projects around more quickly, and hence the change on the website. I think the competitive commercial is always going to be probably a 45-day review. With that program, you have an annual application deadline in August typically, and they're very large scale, complicated projects. So it takes us a while to go through all the materials and then have a recommendation for funding, typically in around Halloween.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I got it very well explained. Just want to say thank you again. And I see no questions from my colleagues at this moment, Secretary McCord. Oh, I do. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for my not being in my hand. McCord, look, I always a pleasure for you and your agency to come before Budget Committee. I spent all of my life in the House on the Budget Committee, so sort of used to the progress that you all have made, and I look forward to these hearings every year. I have a question for you that's a little off note, but I think it's valuable as well. Look, the Department of Planning, can you speak briefly, or you can feel free to send to the committee your connection with our universities, community colleges, and our high schoolers? Because I think, the more that we get our citizens involved in the understanding of how we're planning out, Maryland's future, I think that's the better off we'll be. So very much interested in that information because I think in the long run, particularly when we're talking about trusts and census and everything, our great state, I think it could be a huge positive for us. And if you're already doing it, we would love to be, a liaison or a conduit for you to connect our schools in our respective districts. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Seeing no further questions or comments, Secretary McCord, we're going to end your part of the committee hearing, and we're going to first just thank you for your leadership and running the agency. Mr. Gray, we get to say this again, but thank you for the detailed and commitment that you have in reference to the analyst report, and just saying thank you all for your leadership. We'll move over to the Maryland Environmental Services report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. And I keep drawing a blank, colleagues, because it says Maryland Environmental Science, and I know it's not science. So at this moment, I'd like to bring up Budget Analyst Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Should be seeing on your screen right now the Maryland Environmental Services operating budget summary. This information reflects, and I'll just focus on really the differences between the revenues and expenditures between fiscal 2020 and fiscal 21. So Maryland Environmental Service took more work on in fiscal 21, so more revenues came in. They were not able to capture all of the operating costs associated with that work, and therefore they did have a decrease between the 2 years in terms of their operating income. In terms of the revenue for the Maryland Environmental Service, stepping back here for a second, there are two main projects or ways that the Maryland Environmental Service interacts with the state budget. There are reimbursable projects, which are basically operating the water and wastewater treatment plants for a lot of state facilities, and that's under an executive order and a Board of Public Works directive. There's also direct contractual work that the Maryland Environmental Service does with state agencies as well. In terms of Maryland Environmental Services revenue by fund source for fiscal 21, you see that state and local government consists around 94% of its revenues. In terms of the revenue by business activity type, see that dredging, solid waste, water, wastewater operations reflect around 65% of the overall funding for the agency. And jumping right into revenues by business this type activity, the differences between fiscal 2020 and 21, largest change is around $5.7 million for the solid waste management component of their work based on the Prince George's County materials recycling facility. There's additional expansion work and kind of an interesting new process that was put in place there to increase recycling of particular types of plastics. And then there's also about a $4.6 million decrease for environmental dredging and restoration that reflects the winding down of the Cox Creek expansion project. In terms of the operating expenses, a change between fiscal 22 and 23 now, main change is around $2.1 million for salaries, wages, and fringe benefits due to a 3% COLA that's being allocated. For revenue generating services, this is the, in terms of components, Maryland Environmental Service is primarily fee for service, but also has revenue generating activities as well. And these are the kind of products and services they provide for used oil collection, geospatial engineering services, and yard waste grinding. And just like to highlight the geospatial and engineering services, that a significant amount of additional revenue is coming as a result of work on a smart pond technology with partners. However, they were not able to capture all of the costs associated with their labor costs, and therefore there was a decrease in the amount of funding or the overall net for that year for geospatial and engineering services. In terms of fiscal 22, Maryland Environmental Service actually earned around $1.7 million more than they were using in terms of their projects in fiscal 21. So typically that money would either be completely reverted to the state or be kept in certain project reserve funds for flexibility and emergency circumstances. In this particular case, $80,000 or so is being remitted to the Department of Natural Resources and special funds. And the agency has requested that the remainder, around $1.7 million, be retained in a new project reserve fund, the Eastern Correctional Institution Energy Upgrade Project Fund, in order to be able to provide for cost overruns that they've experienced. So this new fund, new project reserve fund is within their authority to actually provide for these project reserve funds. They already have 3. This would be a 4th additional project reserve fund. What's different about this is that typically the project reserve funds have met like a one-to-one characteristic. The money that was retained or the money was not used in a particular year for one particular project, say a wastewater treatment plant at a Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services institution, would then go into a project reserve fund in order to address any kind of concerns or cost overruns or flexibility needs. In this case, monies from a number of different projects are all being dropped into one particular project reserve fund. So that's the only difference in terms of what you've seen before on this. And we'll discuss this a little bit more in terms of an issue a little bit later on. The reimbursable project operating expenses increased between fiscal 22 and 23, once again, primarily due to the salary, wages, and fringe benefits 3% COLA allocation noted previously. In terms of the reimbursable projects, I would just like to focus on 2 in particular here. This is the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services Central Maryland Correctional Facilities being added to the complement of activities Maryland Environmental Service conducts. It's an increase of $949,228 for fiscal 23. And then you also see an increase of around $983,000 for the Eastern Correctional Institution cogeneration facility. So this cogeneration facility is being converted from using wood chips to natural gas as part of an overall project to create a natural gas pipeline connection to a main trunk line that's coming down the Eastern Shore. So that natural gas conversion process and kind of all the different accoutrements that have to occur within MES's or Eastern Correctional Institution's operations has resulted in overall cost increase, which is why the project reserve fund is being created. And you're also just seeing here an increase due to the fact that natural gas apparently is more costly than wood chips at this time. In terms of personnel data, there's no change reflected here in terms of the data submitted by the Department of Budget and Management. There's a lot more flux internally in terms of MES's operations, though. First issue concerns Chapter 72 of 2021, the Maryland Environmental Service Reform Act. The concern here was due to a former executive director receiving a severance payment that did not appear to be authorized or appropriate, and also was retaining particular materials of the agencies that did not appear to be appropriate. Therefore, Chapter 72 provided for a number of changes in the governance and administration of MES. In terms of requirements by MES, MES is required to submit a report by December 31, 2021, covering the requirements, the policies, first bullet point on this page here. MES has notes that it has adopted or readopted all of the policies by the deadline set. In terms of the independent assessment of the board, this is conducted by RSM, independent consultant that looked at a number of components noted here in terms of the board capabilities and structure, accountability, engagement, and provided advice on those particular topics. For the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act reporting, there's another component of the report. MES submitted information talking about a 6-month process of analyzing carbon emissions and evaluating technologies that have co-benefits through 4 of its operating groups. And the findings are related here. And finally, there are board members and executive staff training. That's all been conducted by the time period required. In terms of additional activities reflected here at the bottom of the page, new board has been installed, diversity officer has been hired, transparency requirements have been put into place. Executive director expense reporting is being done, my understanding is now monthly. And then there have been changes to procurement contracting as well. One thing I'd like to highlight here is the audit. MES is working on the requirement of completing an independent audit focused on unauthorized spending, misallocated expenses, and lack of conformity with state law or MES board policies. I'd like to lump that into the Department of Legislative Services recommendation to comment on the status of implementing recommendations from the independent assessment of the board, including the development of a new 5-year strategic plan and a charter and bylaws for the board, and then also talk about the standing of that audit as well. In terms of the second issue, this concerns the MES funding statement. So committee narrative in the 2021 Joint Chairman's report requested information that's been requested for a couple of years now. First component is the undesignated unrestricted net assets that really refers to what can be considered MES's fund balance. It's increased from 4.3 million to 6.7 million, but it's basically an accounting change due to the fact of the inclusion of MES's equipment fund into its designated unrestricted net assets. In terms of the overhead rate, you can see the changes over the years. General and administrative rate has not changed as much as might be hoped in terms of saving the state money. If that rate were to come down, obviously there would be savings to various entities. One original consideration was that the more activities MES does and is able to spread its overhead rates over, then in theory, they could reduce the overhead rate in general. We have not necessarily seen that in the time period shown. What you have seen is a decrease in the water and wastewater rate, this rate red line, that has come down from 14.62% in 2015 to 5.62% in 2023 on audited documents. And that's good because a lot of the work that's done by MES for the state is the water and wastewater sector and in terms of recent reimbursable projects particularly. And that means that rate coming down is meaning savings to the state for that purpose. And even though it's a heavy operations component of its operation. In terms of the project reserve fund balances, we've already discussed a little bit about the ECI Energy Upgrade Project Reserve Fund. Here's the $1,659,204 going into the account or to new reserve fund. And my understanding is the Department of Budget and Management has approved the retaining of the funding for that particular purpose. And DLS recommends that the committee narrative continue to be adopted, which is also reflected on this page here formally in terms of the actual narrative that would be included in the Joint Chairman's report. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Seeing no questions by the committee at this moment, we're going to turn it over and bring up the new chairman, Mr. Frederick Smolkin and Dr. Glass, Executive Director for MES.
Thank you, Senator McCray, Chair McCray, and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Charles Glass. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Service. And as Senator McCray mentioned, Judge Smolkin is here with me. So I'll go through the response and then I'll hand it over to Judge Smolkin to make a few comments on the status of MES. Also with me are Deputy Director for KEDIC, Chief Financial Officer Patel, and Government Affairs Director Tosi. So we have gone through a lot. We would first like to thank Andrew Gray and the entire DLS team for their thorough work on the MES operating and capital budget. Mr. Gray is top notch, and we appreciate his professionalism throughout the budget development process. So for his first question on comments on both the strategic plan, the charter and bylaws, and the audit, I'd like to let you know that we did have a clean audit on our general associated gap analysis audit that we have every year on the fiscal year 21 budget. So that cleared and was provided in our annual report update in late December. Then we've also had a single audit that's still underway by RSM, our consultant. RSM also, a separate group inside RSM also performed the board assessment. And for the last audit that this question refers to, it's actually an audit of a select number of expenses to verify that they have not been inappropriate in any way. So the CFO and the lead auditor for RSM have been in negotiations. Those negotiations have concluded, and as the report states, that audit is expected by March. On the strategic plan, we're currently in the process of developing a new 5-year strategic plan. This project was initiated in November and is ongoing. I actually became aware of the end date of our strategic plan last summer and started talking to folks and getting things together. The board has been briefed on the plan, and we plan to have a draft to them by the April 22 MES board meeting, where they're reviewing comment for the 3 months before the end of the fiscal year, so that we would have that in place for FY23. And we've already done a survey to clients that we expect results from soon, and a survey of all MES employees. And I was informed the survey to MES employees went out, I believe, Monday, and we've already gotten 145 as of yesterday. We had 145 respondents out of our 725 current employees. So we're getting a lot of feedback. Some of it's positive. I've told I'll be happy with some of the comments, but we're going to go through an analysis. It's all anonymous, of course, and we're going to go through analysis, and we'll include that in our presentation to the board and suggestions of how we improve going forward. For charter and bylaws, the MES board is working with MES Principal Counsel on this matter. The board chair has indicated it is a priority to complete this task by the end of the fiscal year, and I'm sure that Judge Schmolken will do so. And for the last issue of community narrative and following the tradition that has started for the last few years, MES concurs with the analysis, with the analyst's recommendation. And we'll be continuing to provide our funding statement, information on undesignated, unrestricted net assets, overhead rate, project reserves, fund status, and justification for reimbursable project funding changes. And with that, before we go to any questions, passing them back to you, Senator McCray, I'd like to have Judge Schmolken be allowed some time to talk about his experiences as the new chair of the board.
Thank you very much. And I first want to say that the people that I have found to work both as our new chairman and just as a human being, the people that MES have working for them are just fantastic people. They're at the top. They want to do it right, and they know how to do it right. And also, we've had some very good ties with Sean, who is our lawyer from Mr. Frosch, or I should say, Commander. I'll call him Commander Frosch. He's been around to everything. So I'm very happy about that, and we have worked together very well. Also, of course, the people that came into our committee in the beginning of July, 1st of July, actually, of 2021 rather. And they are fantastic people. They range all the way from the Eastern Shore to far Western Maryland. And these are people who know what they're doing. They are in their particular area, top notch, and we work very, very well together. So I want to just say that it is a pleasure to have been called into this and to let you all know as senators that we immediately, and when July 1st started, within a couple of days, we started getting things together to make sure that we had everything ready at the right times. And we worked very hard on that. A number of our people worked very, very hard on it, in particular in HR and audit. And the result was we got everything done. I think we got it done right. I think it was done well put together, and it got to you all in October, December, beginning of December, the end of December. We had it all together. And now we're going to go forward in 2022 and put together the things that we need to have done by then. And we know what they are, and they are being worked on. In fact, just next week, we will have a couple of meetings on those things to get them going for our new year. So that's about all I have to say. And except to say it has been a very great pleasure to be able to do this for the state. I think the idea that is so important here is that MES puts together the land and water of this state to keep it clean and to keep it safe for the public. And that's the most important thing. And I think we're doing our hardest to do it. So with that, unless there's any other questions from anyone?
Thank you, Judge Schmolken. I did have one question, probably more of a technical question and an education for myself, Dr. Glass. Obviously, I understand that you all are an agency that's different than other agencies. So on page 11, it gave you a vacancy rate, and like it said 0 and things of that nature. Just wanted to get a better understanding of that so I know in future.
That's not, so the vacancy rate is presented with the 825 personnel. That's not our actual vacancy rate. So we function very much like a consulting firm in a sense. We have billable people, and they are either embedded or task by task on contracts with state agencies, counties, et cetera. And their salary comes from those projects. And then we have a back office in that general overhead rate, is related to a full functioning back office. So executive office, HR, IT, procurement, finance, safety. So all the oversight that needs to support statewide operations in 4 major areas. Our current vacancy rate, we have faced the great resignation just like everyone else. And we have really been intentional the last couple of months as our vacancy rate went from early days while I was here, 4% to 8.5, almost 9%. And we're working hard to relate that, but we have vacancies that are produced by new business as well. So we have an expansion of work and all of a sudden we have vacancies we have to fill. And then we have the normal back and forth. So our natural vacancy rate is most likely 3 to 4% just from people coming in and out. And we have this diversity of our workforce from a laborer at a material recovery facility to a PhD engineer in the executive job. So that diversity leads to different issues with trades. Some of the trades are very hard to fill, electricians, machinists, mechanics. Sometimes even at our rates, which may be a little bit better than some other state agencies, it's still a challenge because we're not offering full private rates. So to answer your question, our vacancy rate right now, we actually just got a dashboard that I plan to present to the board at our next board meeting, completed by IT with our use of Workday, so that there are 3 key pages where I can instantaneously look at every group, what are vacancies in those groups, what jobs are stagnating, what needs some extra recruitment and intensity. We've done some things recently that have been very impactful. We're contacting every vocational high school in the state, and we're contacting every employment office in the state, every county, every municipality, and we're going to go full force with getting our vacancy rate back down under 5%. So.
Thank you, Dr. Glass. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a comment, and I had that question as well on that sheet. So, Mr. Chairman, because that stood out a little bit at 825 and then the 0. Appreciate that. Looking forward to that dashboard, Dr. Glass. Just want to welcome the new chair. And in my other life, opportunity through a commander of mine, and then an individual who worked as a commander under me for a short period of time when I became the sheriff of Prince George's County. So Judge Smolkin, you had a very good relationship with also the sheriff of Prince George's County, something that we will always remember, and you led the Maryland Defense Force and in some other capacities. Captain Terrence Griffith and his wife, who's also in the agency, Karen Griffith, great friends of mine, great colleagues of mine, great leaders in our agency. And I look forward to your leadership and your attention to detail in this role. So it's much needed. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate that. In my old age, it's nice to hear it. So thank you very much. I appreciate that, sir.
Yeah. Seeing no further questions from my colleagues, Dr. Glass, just like to say thank you for your leadership over at MES. Obviously, we can see the different trajectory and the path that we're on, the course correction. And Judge Smolkin, just wanted to say also thank you. Obviously, you come raved by the colleagues of the committee. I believe that one of my staff actually said that she had knew you. So folks do know you, and just your reputation speaks for itself. So colleagues, at this time, I'd just like to once again thank Mr. Gray in reference to the analyst report for MES and held and commitment for colleagues. This ends the hearing today for Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment. You all have a blessed day.
Thank you. Same to you all.
Sir.
It's been a pleasure.